cybersecurity is not just a technical discipline. You need to add the additional procedural parts in your way of securing your OT environment.
Welcome, everyone, to the Industrial Security Podcast. My name's Nate Nelson. I'm here with Andrew Ginter, the Vice President of Industrial Security at Waterfall Security Solutions. He's going to introduce the subject and guest of our show today. Andrew, how's it going?
I'm very well, thank you, Nate. Our guest today is Jan Hartig. He is the CEO and strategic advisor at Security OT in Denmark. And he's going to be talking about deciding what to do next. This is a next step decision support tool that Security OT is working on for industrial security.
All right, then let's get right into it.
Hello, Jan, and welcome to the podcast. Before we get started, can you say a few words about yourself for our listeners and about the good work that you're doing at Security OT?
Sure, Andrew, and thank you for having me on this show. So my name is Jan Hartig. I am a Managing Director in Security OT and Strategic Advisor. We have been working with production companies and utility services for now 6 years. We have been helping them making risk assessments on their OT cybersecurity. Security OT is a pure play OT security company where we are originated in Denmark, but covering the Nordic part of Europe and also having global companies as our customers that are in, for instance, European countries and the US.
Our topic is risk and decisions. When you mentioned that Security OT does risk assessments routinely. When I look at sort of generic risk assessments, most of, a 50 or 75 or 150 page report, most of it seems to be a long list of assets and whether they've been patched and, when the last time the password was changed. Is this what we need in risk assessment? So, what is the need over and above, the asset inventory?
So what we believe in is that cybersecurity is not just a technical discipline. You need to add the additional procedural parts in your way of securing your OT environment. So, what is the criticality of an asset in the production line should be the core consideration that you have. But the things around procedures for backup, about your spare part stock, about incident response plans, and in a patching procedure, whether the components are a part of that, that's normally not a part of an asset inventory database. Normally, you're just having a focus on the devices, but you haven't really put in the aspect around how critical is this device. So if you have an offline printer, that is in the database, but you haven't really said, well, should we have another printer to do the labels for whatever the medicine, or can we live without it for a period of time? And that should be a part of the decision making for the factory manager, saying, where do we actually need to put in our money, depending on the criticality of the device?
Okay, so we need to understand how important each asset is. If the printer goes down, do we have to stop the production line because we can't label the goods anymore? Once you sort of understand importance, what's the next step? What are you using this information for?
So the methodology that we have made is basically trying to calculate a risk score. So the risk score is based on the importance or the criticality of the device versus the part that we actually have, versus the things that we actually have done for either protecting it or being able to recover, respond, or detect and actually attack against the device. So we have looked into the cybersecurity framework with the 4 phases with the protect, detect, respond, and recover. So like protect, we would look into the technical protection of the printer or the PLC or the the HMI. It could be, is it put in a different network segment, or do we have remote access capabilities, which would be a negative thing to have on a device? Or we will also ask into the process around this. We will also, on the detection side, we would look into, do we actually monitor the device or the network for incidents that could occur? Or do we have a response plan? Do we have incident response plan for this? Do we know the ownership of the component? Or do we have SLA on the spare part saying, well, we have one on stock, or we can call a vendor and they would be here within 4 hours with a new printer, for instance. Finally, we look into the recover part about, for instance, backup frequencies. Do we have ever tested the backup, or where do the backup resides? So depending on how you're answering the questions around these things, we would calculate a risk score, and that risk score would be a kind of a equation between the criticality and the different things you've done around the asset.
Andrew, I can't recall exactly when or who, but I feel like we've talked about at least one or two risk tools on this show in the past. What's different with the one we're talking about here?
What I see different here is sort of a deeper dive into availability. Jan mentioned it a bit, and he's going to touch on it again later in the interview. He talked about spare parts. He talked about, are backups available? He said, do we have agreements with the vendors to replace components within a handful of hours if they fail? We're talking about availability. We're talking about keeping production lines up. We're talking about keeping the lights on in power plants. We're talking about addressing risks to production. And this is what a lot of engineering teams in a lot of sites focus on. They sort of have, they figure they have safety under control. And what they're thinking about, top of mind, day in, day out, is availability, is reliability, is keeping production going in the face of routine equipment failures and occasional errors and omissions and this kind of stuff. And so to me, this seems to be a way to engage those teams in cybersecurity by pointing out that cybersecurity risks are relevant to availability. And if you can build up sort of a big picture of risks to availability, of risks to reliability, and position cybersecurity in there, down the road, it's going to be easier to take the next step about saying, well, what other cyber risks are there? How could they reach out of the reliability realm, into your safety realm or your equipment damage realm? But, given the focus of a lot of businesses on reliability, it makes sense to me to build that focus into a cyber risk tool and, deliver, in a sense, a couple of benefits for cybersecurity, yes, and benefits in terms of increased confidence and increased insight into the reliability of our production processes.
So criticality is important. Does the production line have to stop if the printer malfunctions because we can't, label the product anymore? But you're gathering. Once we understand criticality, what else is there? How do we use that?
So our methodology is looking into different aspects of how to evaluate the risk of the asset. So we are relying on or looking into the cybersecurity framework with the 3 different phases. It is the protect, detect, respond, and recover phases. So when we're looking on one component, we are looking about the protection part, saying, do we have the technical protection in place, like firewalling, antivirus, network segmentation? But we will also look into the more soft part, so to say, the procedures around it, saying, well, do we actually have a patch and vulnerability process around these devices? On the detection side, we would look into saying, do we actually monitor? Would we discover an attack against the printer or the sorter or the HMI or the PLC? Where does the alarms go? Do we have a log for this? On the response part, we would look into the more soft part, saying, well, we need an incident response plan. is this component a part of that? Do we actually have ownership on the component? Do we have a SLA about the replacement of the device? Is it end of life, end of support, these issues and on these components? And on the recover side, we will say, well, what about backups? Do we do backups? Do we do a test of the backup? And where is it located actually? If we need it, can we get it? And we're using all these information to kind of put it into a algorithm or an algorithm where we calculate a risk score. So by doing the risk score calculation, we can actually go in and say, well, these components have the most negative risk score, and thereby we should start make decision making about getting these risk scores on an acceptable level.
Okay, so that kind of makes sense in the abstract, but I understand you do this all the time. You have a tool, in your world, when you're doing a risk assessment, when you're putting all of this information together, where does the data come from? Do you press a button and it appears somehow magically? Do you enter the data manually? How do you do this?
We do, when we go out making these assessments, we do see a lot of spreadsheets going on. So people are putting in asset information in different spreadsheets and having that as their asset management inventory lists. So that is we in the tool we are enabling the import of these spreadsheets. It could also be that we have a structured asset management platform that we can import information from. We also seeing from some customers where we've done the assessment that they don't have any idea about what is out there. So what we see is also going out making an active scan where we're using like Nozomi to do a smart polling run where we are getting information back from PLCs, HMIs, and scale and switches and things like that. So we are building up the asset database from that play. So it's different ways that we can import into our tool and then starting up a base of assets. The other side is that we might, when we go out, we do manual registration of OT devices. So we do go out and having the tool. It is enabled on an iPad where you actually can go out and register devices that might not be connected, so you can't see it on the scan. But it also can be new devices that have not been registered yet in the original database. So we do have different ways of getting information into the application.
That makes sense. It sounds like you're importing stuff. There's some manual data entry. Can I ask, how often does this data set change? I mean, and how do you, in a sense, how do you track those changes? If the business implements an incident response plan, that's not something that you can scan the devices and discover that suddenly there is an incident response plan for these devices where there didn't used to be. How often does this change, and how do you keep track of it?
So the idea with the tool is that it's not just a risk assessment tool that you're doing once a year or once every quarter. This should be a continuous work where the operator of the production line are registering changes. So, or it could be on a more global scale. Let's say that they have done an initial risk assessment and figuring out that, well, on the backup part, we don't have any backups. It's clear when we walk through the 300 OT components on the factory floor that we don't have a backup. So we going out through the decision making of the report saying, well, we need to buy a backup solution. And when that backup solution has been implemented, basically you're going into the tool and making a bulk update saying, well, all the devices on production line 5, they are now a part of backups. So you can make a bulk update saying, well, now we have this production line enabled on backups, automatic backups, and thereby you can see that your maturity and your security level would be better due to the fact that your risk score would be better because you have entered that now we have a backup solution implemented on the factory floor. So that's the idea about this. That this is not just a one shot, but it's a continuous work with enhancing our resiliency and our ways of working with cybersecurity in OT.
Okay, so we have the data. It's a wide variety of data. We are maintaining the data. A truism that I try to go by is it's only worth acquiring and tracking data if you're going to use it. Otherwise, it's wasted effort. So can you tell me, once you've got an accurate, up-to-date inventory, understanding criticality, understanding all of these other characteristics of the security program and how they apply to each of the assets, once you have all of this, arguably valuable data set, how do you make it valuable? How do you use it? What do you use it for?
So actually, we've been running a beta test at the customers right now. Hopefully, the tool would be released in the beginning of next year in 24. The experience that we had from the tool and the beta customers is that they actually like and can see a great value in a structured and a centralized way of making reports. So we have some of the customers that are in the beta program are enabled to go out and say, I would like to kind of compare 5 or 6 different factories. And by having KPIs, like we would like to see the number of unsupported hardware that are more than 5 years old, for instance, and we might put in a KPI in the on the factory level saying, well, we won't have a critical infrastructure that are more than 5 years old. That's a KPI we're putting in as a measurement for saying that's where we need to go in and make an investment so we can keep this KPI, and that's what people like, that it's done in a structured way and they can track how far they are on the goal, so to say, and they can kind of measure one period where they had made an assessment and then they're going out the year after, maybe making a new one. So they have a track on what has actually been improved here. So that's a key point that we're seeing from our beta tester, that's a great value for them.
Okay, so the inventory and this sort of standard set of characteristics and standard calculations gives you a ruler. It lets you measure the compare the strength of your security on one part of your production line versus another, compare the strength of your security between factories, report to your management team, key performance indicators. Is that the main benefit? Is that what you use the tool for?
So the main benefit here is that we can kind of look into how the risk score is deciding which investments that are done from a management perspective. So driving the risk score to an acceptable level would be the reports would be included in the reports about what should next step be.
Imagine that you work in a power plant. You're responsible for a half dozen massive boilers. If a cyber attack makes one of these boilers overpressurize and explode, that explosion will most likely kill you. Which protection from that cyber attack would you prefer? Would you like a mechanical relief valve, one that steam pressure forces open when the pressure gets too high so the steam is released harmlessly? Or would you rather have a longer password on the PLC controlling the boilers? The engineering profession has powerful tools to address physical risk from all causes, including cyber risks. But where is the relief valve in the ISO standard or the Industrial 62443 standard? These engineering tools do not exist in cybersecurity standards. Andrew Ginter's latest book, Engineering Grade OT Security, A Manager's Guide, looks at this topic. You can request your free copy at waterfall-security.com/engineering-grade-OT-security.
So, Nate, let me recap just a little bit here. I heard sort of two main benefits out of this risk scoring system. One is that you get a number out of the process at the end, saying, sort of adding up all of the risk of downtime at a facility. And, the number kind of makes sense. You assign a number to every device in the facility, you add it all up. What does this mean? Well, it means larger facilities with more stuff are at greater risk of downtime, everything else being equal. It gives you a ruler to sort of measure risk of downtime across facilities, so that you can, again, make investment decisions. Where should if I want the biggest bang for my investment dollar in terms of reduced downtime due to cybersecurity risks, due to reliability risks, where am I going to put my next dollar? Well, which facility is at greatest risk? Okay, now that I've figured out the facility, I look within the facility and I say, well, which components in the facility are contributing the most? Those are the components I should focus on. What are the characteristics of those components that are contributing to most? Is it that they're not backed up? Is it that they're old equipment that we can't buy on, from the vendor anymore and we don't have spares for anymore? Is it that, multiple vendors are remoting into the same device, and if any one of them makes a mistake, there's going to be finger pointing and it's going to take forever to figure out what happened? These are all characteristics that contribute to risk. And, here's a sort of a score sheet that lets us figure out, if we've got X dollars to spend this year on risk, reliability risk, from cybersecurity to normal equipment failures, where should I focus that, and how do I drill down and select the components that need upgrades, that need remediation?
So what you're saying is that a key output is the actual risk score for a production line or for a set of assets. And if that score is unacceptable, then the next step is obviously to fix it. Do your customers understand the meaning of a risk score? Do they understand the difference between a plus 17 and a minus 432? Do these numbers mean anything?
So the tool gives you the ability to look into what is actually causing a negative risk score, and thereby making decision based on that knowledge. But clearly the numbers is mostly for the decision maker saying, well, a bad risk score is probably not good, so we need to look into those. So basically, when we're doing these assessments, you make a sort at the end saying, well, which one are the worst ones, and do they have any characteristics, the ones with a bad risk score? Do we see a kind of a trend saying, well, we don't have an incident response plan, or we don't have necessary backups, or we don't have spare parts in? So can we, as a company, on a global scale, saying, well, we need to look into either a technical solution, or we need a procedural part, like incident response, saying, well, from a global perspective in a company, we need to go out and develop an incident response plan, because the risk score showing that we don't have that. So that's the kind of where you're going from a detailed level on the component part and kind of putting it up to a more global consideration about where should we put in our efforts, because we can see all the factories are missing whatever. So that's also the idea that the risk score can be used on different levels in the company, not only for the operator, but also for the factory manager, but also for the risk governance board, saying, well, we can see that there's an issue about this all over the place, so we need to do something about it.
Okay, so the tool shows you what is sort of sticking out as most exposed or most consequential. Can we do what if scenarios? I mean, let's say we define an incident response plan for production line 4, or we deploy antivirus throughout factory number 3. Can we see how the risk score will change as a result of those actions, or will change if we carry out those actions?
it is on our wish list to have that on a future version. It's not there yet, but still, what we can tell the customers is how does which part of the questions are actually impacting the risk score most. So we can go out and saying like whatever a negative or a backup gives you a negative of -50 or whatever. So we can show the customer how have we defined the algorithm behind it, saying which one do we see as the most critical parts that gives a bad risk score. And we also in a process for looking into whether the customer should be able to give input to how the risk score should be calculated. So our definition of the risk score might not be suitable for another customer, but it's not in the play right now to go out and kind of tailorize the risk score for a specific company. But we can tell the customer how is the risk score defined, how does, for instance, backup or spare parts or missing incident response plan impact the risk score. We can do that, but we don't have the what if kind of play in the application yet.
You folks are in the European Union. You're in Denmark, and NIS2 is the big news in the union. The last couple of years. Does this tool give your customers a leg up on NIS2?
I think that when you're looking into NIS2, the headline for NIS2 is basically doing a risk-based approach and using that as a decision making for how do you secure your utility service or your production or whatever, your bank, and including in that NIS2, there's a lot of focus on, for instance, asset management, vulnerability management, incident management, and other important disciplines. So it will be enforced here in October 24, and we believe that the methodology and the tools that we have can help complying with these requirements from NIS2. NIS2 also requests that the management team of the organization have a thorough understanding about the security level of the company, and we believe that putting in key performance indicators about where you are as a company from a cybersecurity perspective is important for the management team to have the insight and the capabilities to approve new incentives where they can say, well, it's not good with a negative risk score. We need to do something. So the questions about how you can equip the C-level with the right knowledge, that's one of the key outputs from a risk assessment tool as ours. But again, it's not just doing risk assessments; it's also doing as a continuous work around cybersecurity. How can we improve? Where can we improve? And also track the improvements in the tool.
Andrew, risk has been an important theme of our podcast, especially recently. But when we use terms sometimes in this area like risk-based approach, it just kind of seems a little bit vague and open to interpretation.
Oh, it's very much open to interpretation. I mean, I'm familiar with the North American market. In some parts of the market, sort of in common usage, risk-based is synonymous with doing whatever you want, because risk-based says I assess the risk. I decide how at risk I am. I determine my business's risk tolerance. And so, anything I do is by definition risk-based because I've assessed the risk and because I've determined the tolerance. I can set the tolerance bar. I can tolerate as much risk as I want and therefore spend as much or as little as I want on cybersecurity. That's sort of the common usage. The thing is that common usage and regulations don't jive. NIS2 is a directive from the European Union to the member states. The member states, to comply with the directive, have to define regulations for critical infrastructure for cybersecurity. And the regulation, the directive, instructs the member states to produce regulations that are risk-based. The member states are not going to say you can do whatever you want. The member states are going to do something that says you have to have, you have to provide evidence that you have assessed the risk and that you're taking steps to address the risk. And here's a tool that provides evidence. This is a tool that auditors are going to look at and say, yep, you have done the risk assessment. You have identified what's most at risk. So this is a step in the right direction, it sounds like.
So you said that the tool is coming out in Q1, but it sounds like you've been using something like this tool for some time, previous versions of it, whatever. How has the tool been received by your customers? I mean, they've presumably been using beta versions. What value do they see in it?
So first of all, they like the idea about having the aspect around how can we protect the availability of a production flow or a utility service with a pump station and things like that. So having a clear view on how do we protect these things from having the availability up running for either the production line or the utility service, and people like the idea about adding information to the traditional asset management tool where they have what we say kind of static data or a non kind of critical information added to the data from the assets. So they have perceived it very well, and normally we see that they have been using spreadsheets which are somewhere, or somebody has updated it somewhere at some point of time. So they like the idea about a structured way, one place to have the data, and they can work with them. We have built a solution around traditional Microsoft platforms like SQL and Power BI, so they can get a good insight and have a structured approach to how data are covered and stored.
So this makes sense, a tool to automate the process of tracking, a lot of security characteristics, a tool that you can press a button and say, where is the next investment in security that's going to pay off the most in terms of increased reliability of manufacturing and critical infrastructure. Thank you for joining us. This all makes sense. Before we let you go, can you sum up for our listeners what are the most important lessons here, and what should they be thinking about going forward?
Yeah, well, from our experience and also what we hear all the time is that if you don't know your OT infrastructure, you're not able to protect it, and we believe that is true. When we're doing assessments, about 90% of the assessments that we've done, we have found components that were not registered, or even the operator didn't know it was dangerous. And I guess that's also a learning here, saying that the whole thing about awareness on the factory floor about putting in modems or putting in devices that can actually help the operator for being more effective might have a impact on the security in the factory floor. So having a structured approach about asset management from a risk perspective will help the customers to do the right decisions, and we believe that there's a need for going into the details here, having the specifications on a component level to make that decisions. So I mean, you need to put in also not only the technical protective solutions, just as network segmentation or whatever, antivirus or monitoring. You also need to look into the overlaying procedures for maintaining the right level of cybersecurity. I mean, just the recent attacks that we've seen on water utilities in the US and in Ireland, and where vulnerabilities were used to to lay down water utilities. Also, in Denmark, where we've seen an attack against 22 energy companies just recently, where a vulnerability in a firewall were utilized. It all makes sense to go out and actually look into the procedures, and that can help us protecting the infrastructure, regardless of its utility service or production. So, and I think that's important output from this, that we don't only look on the technical part, but also having a focus on who's actually doing what in our companies. So about the tool, I mean, reach out on LinkedIn. We would like to have customers on board to evaluate the solution, and you can see more on our websites. But thank you very much, Andrew, for having me here.
Andrew, that seems to be the end of your interview with Jan. Do you have any final word you'd like to take us out with today?
Yeah, I mean, I learned something here. I mean, this tool sounds like a step in the right direction. It in my understanding, it does three things. It identifies all risks to reliability, to reliable operations, from the mundane, lack of spare parts, to the cyber, lack of an incident response plan. It gives you a ruler to compare risks across sites. Again, it helps with investment decisions. Which site is most in need of reliability investments? Which site is most in need of security investments? It helps make decisions about how to spend those security dollars most effectively, and it provides the kind of evidence that we're going to need for NIST 2 regulations, evidence of disciplined, risk-based decision-making, not hand-waving, but actual numbers and justification for security investments.
All right. Well, with that, thank you to Jan Hartig for speaking with you, Andrew. And Andrew, as always, thank you for speaking with me.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you, Nate.
This has been the Industrial Security Podcast from Waterfall. Thanks to everybody out there listening.